Imagine this. You walk into a room. Maybe it's a spiritual gathering, a retreat, or even just a cozy living room where a group has gathered to discuss deep truths about life. There's one person who instantly captures everyone's attention. They speak with authority about meditation, consciousness, enlightenment, and love. They sound wise, enlightened, almost untouchable. Their words have the rhythm of scripture. Their eyes gleam with a kind of confidence that makes you believe, at least for a moment, that they've seen what others cannot. You lean in. You listen. You feel like you've found someone who has unlocked the mysteries of life. But here's the unsettling truth. Not every spiritual voice comes from a place of genuine wisdom. Some come from something far more deceptive, far more dangerous. This is the hidden world of the spiritual narcissist. And Carl Jung, one of the greatest minds in psychology, warned us about this very trap. Today, we're diving deep into the psychology of spiritual narcissists, why they exist, how they operate, and why Jung believed that some of the greatest dangers to the human soul don't come from the obvious villains of the world, but from those who wear the mask of light. Stay with me, because by the end of this video, you may start to see spiritual life, and maybe even your own path, with completely new eyes. So let's start with something simple. What even is a spiritual narcissist? Jung never used the term directly, but his writings about the ego, the shadow, and the archetypes point us straight to the core of this phenomenon. A spiritual narcissist is not just someone who is proud of their beliefs, or someone who talks a little too much about their meditation practice. No, a spiritual narcissist is someone who has weaponized spirituality to serve their ego. It's when enlightenment becomes a performance, when wisdom is no longer about inner transformation, but about social domination. And the irony? They often believe their own act. They truly think they are higher, better, or chosen. And it's that belief that makes them so convincing. Jung saw this pattern repeatedly. He noticed that when people begin exploring the deeper aspects of the psyche, whether through religion, mysticism, or psychology itself, there's always a danger of inflation. Inflation, in Jung's words, is when the ego identifies with something greater than itself. Imagine a person glimpsing the vastness of the unconscious, or feeling the power of a transcendent spiritual experience. Instead of integrating that experience with humility, they merge their fragile ego with the infinite, suddenly proclaiming themselves as gods, prophets, or the only keepers of truth. It's intoxicating, it's seductive, and it's dangerous, not only for them, but for anyone who follows them. Think about it. When someone says, "I have seen God, I know the truth, and if you want salvation, you must follow me," they are no longer sharing wisdom. They are demanding worship. That's not spirituality. That's narcissism cloaked in sacred robes. And it thrives because human beings naturally long for guidance, for certainty, for light in dark times. When someone presents themselves as the beacon, we're drawn like moths to a flame. But not every flame leads you home. Some only burn you. Here's where Jung's psychology helps us peel back the mask. He taught that every individual has a shadow, the parts of ourselves we deny, repress, or project onto others. The spiritual narcissist, in many ways, is someone who has never truly faced their shadow. Instead, they cover it with light. They speak of compassion, but cannot accept criticism. They preach humility, but secretly crave admiration. They talk about detachment from ego, but every fiber of their being clings to recognition. They live in contradiction, and unless you look closely, you'll never see the fracture. But let me tell you a story. Picture a man. Let's call him Arif. He was once an ordinary seeker, struggling with pain, loneliness, and questions about life. He began meditating, reading spiritual texts, maybe dabbling in psychology and philosophy. At first, it humbled him. He saw the vastness of life and his small place in it. But then something shifted. People began to notice him. They told him he was wise. They admired how calm he seemed, how articulate his words were. Slowly, he started believing he was more than just a seeker. He was becoming a guide, a guru, maybe even a chosen soul. And before long, he wasn't meditating to grow. He was meditating to perform. He wasn't reading to learn. He was reading to dominate conversations. His spirituality was no longer about connection with the divine. It was about feeding his ego with applause. He became, without even realizing it, a spiritual narcissist. The tragic part? Erev genuinely believed he was enlightened. He wasn't consciously trying to deceive. He thought he was walking the path of light. And this is why Jung stressed the importance of self-awareness. The unconscious is powerful, and if you don't confront your own darkness, it will take control in ways you can't even see. This raises a haunting question. Could any of us fall into this trap? The answer is yes, and that's what makes this so dangerous. Spiritual narcissism isn't just about cult leaders or false gurus. It can show up in ordinary lives. It's the yoga teacher who subtly boasts about their discipline, the friend who constantly reminds you of their mindfulness practice, the person who can't stop posting about their higher vibrations on social media. It can even show up in us when we catch ourselves wanting others to admire how spiritually evolved we are. That's the ego, sneaking back into the temple. Carl Jung wrote about the archetype of the wise old man, the sage, the prophet. But he also warned that when the ego identifies with this archetype prematurely, it leads to inflation. You start to think you are the embodiment of wisdom itself, rather than a humble seeker in a vast, mysterious universe. That inflation creates spiritual narcissists. They stop being human, at least in their own eyes. They become divine, untouchable, superior. And if you think about it, this is not just a modern issue. History is full of self-proclaimed messiahs, prophets, and enlightened leaders who led thousands, sometimes millions, into disaster. Charismatic figures who claimed to speak for God, but who in reality were serving their own ego. Wars have been fought, families destroyed, lives lost, all because of the intoxicating power of spiritual narcissism. But Jung wasn't all doom and gloom. He also gave us the antidote. He said the true path of individuation, the process of becoming whole, is not about rejecting the ego, but about balancing it with the unconscious. It's about holding the tension between light and dark, good and evil, humility and greatness. The spiritual narcissist fails because they deny the shadow. They refuse to see their flaws. They believe they are pure light, and in that very belief, they become consumed by darkness. So how do you recognize a spiritual narcissist in your own life? Pay attention to the small details. Do they demand loyalty instead of encouraging independence? Do they speak as if they alone hold the truth? Do they respond to criticism with anger or dismissal instead of reflection? Do they subtly, or not so subtly, make you feel smaller so that they can feel bigger? These are the cracks in the mask. But here's the deeper question. Why are we so easily drawn to them? Because the truth is, the spiritual narcissist is only half the equation. The other half is us. The followers, the seekers, the admirers. Jung would say it's because we project our own inner wisdom onto them. Instead of owning our capacity for insight, we hand it over to someone else. We give away our power. And when we do, we create the very conditions that allow spiritual narcissists to thrive. So let's lean deeper into this idea of projection. Imagine holding a mirror, but instead of seeing yourself, you see someone else. You see the qualities you wish you had: wisdom, calmness, strength, enlightenment. That's projection. Jung said we often project our unlived life, our hidden potential, onto others. When you see someone and think, they are everything I wish I could be, chances are you're not seeing them as they are. You're seeing them as the container for your own disowned light. This is precisely how spiritual narcissists gain their power. They become the screen onto which people project their deepest longings. And once you hand your light to them, they can manipulate it, control it, even weaponize it. Think of how dangerous this becomes. A spiritual narcissist doesn't need to be truly wise. They only need to look wise. They only need to echo the language of enlightenment with enough confidence that people will fill in the rest. You'll assume they're deeper than they really are, because you're projecting your own depth onto them. And if you don't take back that projection, they will feed on it endlessly. Jung had a word for this: inflation of the ego through collective projection. It's when a group of people invests so much psychic energy into one person that the individual themselves becomes swollen with false divinity. They start to believe the projections, and soon the line between genuine insight and pure ego becomes blurred, even for them. They may start with good intentions. They may genuinely want to help. But over time, they drink the nectar of admiration, and it poisons them. Now, think of someone like this in your own life. Maybe not a guru or spiritual leader, but even a friend who always has to be the wise one. Have you noticed how draining it feels to be around them? How their advice, while sounding helpful, often carries an undertone of superiority. That's the subtle form of spiritual narcissism. It's not always grand, dramatic, or cult-like. Sometimes it's just in the everyday dynamic of one person claiming the higher ground, leaving everyone else in the valley below. Jung insisted that real wisdom never separates people. It unites. If someone's spirituality makes you feel small, ashamed, or dependent on them, it's not real spirituality. It's performance. True spirituality empowers you, not enslaves you. But here's the twist. Jung also warned that when we become aware of spiritual narcissists, we shouldn't just demonize them. Because the more we point fingers, the more we risk missing the lesson in ourselves. The urge to appear spiritual, to be admired, to stand above others, it's in all of us. It's part of the human condition. And if we don't acknowledge it, if we push it into the shadow, it will rise unconsciously and control us. The real task is not to eliminate the narcissist out there, but to confront the narcissist in here. Imagine you've just come back from a deep meditation retreat. You feel lighter, calmer, maybe even awakened. Your first instinct? To tell everyone about it, to show them how much you've changed, to shine your light so they can see it. And while that can come from a place of generosity, it can also come from the ego's hunger to be admired. Jung would say, pause, ask yourself, am I sharing to serve others, or am I sharing to serve myself? That simple reflection can save you from sliding down the slope towards spiritual narcissism. Let's make this even more practical. Suppose you're in a group conversation and someone is struggling with stress. You jump in and say, well, if you meditated like I do, you wouldn't feel this way. Sounds small, right? But in that moment, you've placed yourself above them. You've used spirituality not as compassion, but as comparison. This is how spiritual narcissism infiltrates the everyday. It doesn't always look like grandiosity. Sometimes it's just superiority dressed in soft, soothing words. Carl Jung called this the danger of identification with the archetype. When you identify too strongly with the archetype of the healer, the sage, or the wise man, you forget that you're human. You forget that you, too, have flaws, wounds, shadows. And once you forget that, you've fallen. Because wisdom without humility isn't wisdom at all. It's a mask. Now, let's zoom out for a moment. Why does this matter so much today? Why is the psychology of spiritual narcissism so relevant in our modern world? Because we're living in an age where spirituality is no longer confined to monasteries or sacred texts. It's everywhere. It's on YouTube, Instagram, TikTok. It's in self-help books and podcasts. It's in weekend retreats marketed like vacations. And with this explosion of spirituality in the marketplace, the opportunities for narcissism to slip in have multiplied. It's never been easier to perform enlightenment. A few quotes, a few deep stares into the camera, a soft tone, and suddenly you're the guru. But Jung would caution us, beware of spiritual authority that grows too fast, too easily, too publicly, because where there is quick power, there is often hidden shadow. Think of how social media rewards this. The posts that go viral are not the ones where someone admits, "I'm struggling with my practice today." No. The viral posts are the ones that sound absolute, confident, enlightened. The algorithm loves certainty. But certainty is exactly what Jung warned against. The unconscious is vast and mysterious. Anyone who claims to have total certainty about life's mysteries is not speaking from wisdom. They're speaking from ego. Real wisdom always carries a touch of humility, even mystery. It says, "I don't fully know." The spiritual narcissist can never say that, because to admit, "I don't know," would crack their mask. And their mask is everything. This brings us to an even deeper point, the moral cost of spiritual narcissism. Jung believed that when the ego identifies with divinity, it not only deceives others, but destroys the individual from within. Why? Because the psyche cannot sustain inflation forever. Eventually, the unconscious will correct the imbalance. And the fall from false divinity is brutal. Many who inflate themselves spiritually end up facing breakdowns, scandals, or complete disillusionment. We've seen it time and time again. Gurus caught in lies, leaders falling from grace, teachers exposed for hypocrisy. It's not just a social failure. It's a psychological inevitability. The psyche demands wholeness, and inflation shatters wholeness. But if this is the trap, what's the path out? Jung's answer: integration, facing the shadow, owning the parts of yourself you want to deny, accepting that you are both light and dark, wise and foolish, divine and human. The true spiritual journey is not about rising above humanity. It's about embracing it fully. The spiritual narcissist pretends they've transcended humanity. The genuine seeker knows they are still human, always human, no matter how deep their insights. And that humility is the anchor that keeps you from floating away into the clouds of inflation. Now, let's imagine another story. A woman named Layla. She's been practicing yoga for years, leading classes, posting her journey online. People admire her discipline. They tell her she's inspiring. At first, it fills her heart, but soon, it starts filling her ego. She begins curating her life for admiration. Every pose, every meal, every meditation becomes content. Slowly, without realizing it, she becomes addicted to the role of the enlightened one. And then, one day, in the middle of teaching, she feels a wave of emptiness. She realizes she doesn't even know who she is anymore outside of the role. That's the crisis Jung described, the collapse of the inflated self. But it's also the beginning of something real, because in that moment of collapse, she can finally meet her shadow. She can finally be whole. And maybe that's the paradox. Spiritual narcissism is not just a trap. It's also a lesson. It shows us how easily the ego can hijack even the most sacred path. But it also forces us, eventually, to see the truth. And the truth is, no one is above the struggle. Not the guru, not the teacher, not you, not me. We're all in it. We're all learning. We're all human. Now pause for a second and think. Have you ever caught yourself wanting others to notice your growth? Wanting them to admire how spiritual, wise, or calm you've become? That's the seed. That's the shadow peeking through. And it's not something to be ashamed of. It's something to acknowledge. Because once you acknowledge it, it loses its grip. Jung believed that what we make conscious no longer controls us. That's the gift of self-awareness. So, the next time you encounter someone who radiates certainty, who claims to have transcended, who demands your loyalty in exchange for enlightenment. Step back. Ask yourself, are they guiding me to my own inner wisdom, or are they feeding their own? That single question can save you from falling under the spell of a spiritual narcissist. And it can also remind you not to become one yourself. There's a scene I want you to picture. A small hall, dimly lit, with cushions scattered across the floor. People sit cross-legged, waiting for the teacher to arrive. The room is buzzing with quiet reverence, the kind of silence that feels heavy, like it's holding its breath. Finally, the teacher enters. They walk slowly, deliberately, as if every step carries cosmic weight. The audience lowers their gaze. Some even clasp their hands. The teacher sits, closes their eyes, and begins to speak. The words are simple. You are all divine beings, but only through me will you realize your true divinity. That single sentence captures the essence of spiritual narcissism, a claim to light that depends on your submission. And Jung would urge us to look closely, because this is where psychology and power intersect. Jung saw that the human psyche longs for meaning. We crave guidance. We want someone to point us toward truth, but that longing can make us vulnerable. The spiritual narcissist thrives on this vulnerability, positioning themselves as the bridge between you and the divine. They may speak of love, unity, or cosmic consciousness, but the subtle message is always the same. You need me, and once that dependency is created, the balance of power shifts. Now, let's break this down through Jung's lens. He often spoke about the archetype of the self, the deepest center of the psyche, the part that connects us to wholeness and transcendence. But here's the catch. The ego can never become the self. The ego can only serve it, align with it, or glimpse it. When a person begins to identify their ego with the self, they fall into inflation. They believe they are the self, the divine center, the ultimate authority. And from there, the spiral begins. The tragedy is that many spiritual narcissists don't set out to deceive. They often begin with real experiences of transcendence, moments of bliss, visions, deep meditations. They taste the self, but instead of bowing to its vastness, they grab hold of it and wear it like a crown. They forget that the self is beyond possession. You cannot own it. You cannot perform it, but the ego will try. And when it does, the person becomes a caricature of spirituality, shiny on the outside, hollow on the inside. This hollowness, Jung noted, often leaks out in subtle ways. Listen closely to the way a spiritual narcissist speaks. There's usually an undertone of superiority, even when cloaked in gentle words. They'll say things like, "One day you'll understand," or "When you've reached my level of awareness." It's always a hierarchy, always a ladder with them on the top rung. True wisdom, in contrast, never pulls rank. It meets you where you are. But why do we fall for it? Why do intelligent, sincere seekers surrender their power to such figures? Jung's answer takes us back to projection. We hand over our own inner self, our own potential for wisdom, because it feels safer to believe someone else holds it for us. Owning our own light is frightening. It comes with responsibility. If I admit that the wisdom I admire in another is actually a reflection of my own soul, then I can no longer avoid the work. I can no longer hide behind the excuse that they know and I don't. So we project. We say, they are enlightened. I am not. And in doing so, we create the guru, the saint, the spiritual narcissist. Let me tell you about Mira, a woman I once read about. She was searching for answers after a painful divorce. In her brokenness, she found a spiritual community led by a charismatic teacher. He spoke with authority, quoted scriptures, and seemed to radiate peace. Mira felt seen for the first time in years. She devoted herself to the group, spending money, time, even cutting ties with old friends. For a while it worked. She felt uplifted. But slowly, cracks appeared. She noticed the teacher demanded absolute obedience. He discouraged questioning. He painted those who left as lost souls. And worst of all, he began to use his position for personal gain. Mira felt conflicted, but her longing for belonging kept her trapped. Only later did she realize she had given away her power, her own capacity for wisdom, to a man who fed on it. Jung would say Mira wasn't foolish. She was human. We all want to be guided. But the real danger lies in refusing to reclaim what we've projected. Spiritual narcissists can only thrive as long as we keep feeding them with our own disowned strength. Now, here's something important. Not all spiritual narcissists are obvious. Some are loud, commanding, demanding attention. Others are quiet, soft-spoken, seemingly humble. They may even appear self-deprecating. But underneath, the dynamic is the same. They still thrive on admiration, still position themselves as higher than others. Jung warned that the shadow can wear many disguises, and one of its cleverest tricks is false humility. Think about it. Someone who constantly says, "I am nothing, I am just a servant of the divine," might sound humble. But if they say it in a way that draws endless praise, if they subtly thrive on being admired for their humility, then it's still ego. It's still narcissism, just inverted. Jung would call this identification with the persona the mask we wear for others. The persona of humility can be just as deceptive as the persona of greatness. What matters is not how someone presents themselves, but whether they are truly aware of their shadow. And here's where Jung's brilliance shines. He believed the true test of spiritual maturity is integration, not transcendence. Integration means being able to say, "Yes, I have wisdom, and yes, I also have flaws. I am both enlightened and ignorant, both kind and selfish." The spiritual narcissist can't say this. They split themselves in two: pure light on the outside, unacknowledged darkness within. And because they refuse to own the darkness, they end up projecting it onto others. Have you noticed how often self-proclaimed spiritual authorities demonize outsiders? They label critics as negative energies, skeptics as unenlightened, dissenters as toxic. That's projection. That's their shadow, cast onto the people who refuse to bow. So let's pause here and reflect. How can you, as a seeker, protect yourself? Jung would give this advice. Always look for the shadow, not only in others, but in yourself. When you admire someone, ask, what am I projecting onto them? What qualities do I see in them that I may be disowning in myself? And when you notice someone presenting themselves as flawless, pure, or untouchable, be cautious. Wholeness, Jung said, always includes imperfection. Anyone who denies their flaws is denying their humanity. There's also another clue. How do they handle power? A genuine teacher shares power. They encourage independence. They celebrate when you surpass them. A spiritual narcissist hoards power. They want followers, not equals. They subtly or openly discourage you from thinking for yourself. They want you to orbit around them, like planets around a sun. Jung would say, no human being is the sun. The self is the sun. At best, a teacher can be a mirror reflecting its light. But the moment they start acting like the source, you should be wary. And yet, let's not forget, this isn't just about them. It's about us too. Each of us carries the potential for spiritual narcissism. Maybe not on a grand stage, but in small, everyday ways. Have you ever felt proud of being more aware than someone else? Have you ever judged a friend for being less spiritual? That's the seed, and if left unchecked, it can grow. Jung would remind us, don't just point at the narcissist. Look within. There's a scene from Jung's own writings that always stands out. He once said, the experience of the self is always a defeat for the ego. Think about that. True spiritual awakening doesn't inflate you. It humbles you. It doesn't make you feel like a god. It makes you realize you are not God. You are part of something vast, mysterious, incomprehensible. The spiritual narcissist misses this. They turn awakening into a crown when it's actually a cross. They turn humility into performance when it's supposed to be surrender. And in doing so, they not only deceive others but rob themselves of the very truth they seek. So where does this leave us? With a sobering realization. The path of spirituality is lined with mirrors. Some mirrors reflect your light back to you, showing you your own potential. Others distort your reflection, making you believe you're smaller or greater than you really are. Jung's advice: learn to recognize your reflection. Learn to own it. Don't hand it away. Don't project it onto someone else. Because the moment you reclaim your projection, the spiritual narcissist loses their power. They can no longer feed on you. And you, in turn, become stronger, wiser, more whole. But perhaps the most important takeaway is this: the real guru, the real self, is inside you. Jung never said the journey was easy. Facing your shadow, owning your projections, resisting the allure of false light, it's hard work. It takes courage, but it's the only way to walk the path without losing yourself. Spiritual narcissists will always exist. They are as old as humanity itself. But they don't have to control you. They don't have to define your path. Once you see the psychology behind the mask loses its power. And maybe that's the paradox Jung wanted us to embrace. The very thing we fear, the shadow, the ego, the imperfection, is not our enemy. It's our teacher. The spiritual narcissist denies this and lives in illusion. The true seeker accepts it and walks in truth. Imagine you're standing at a crossroads. On one path, you see a glittering road, smooth and golden, lined with banners of certainty and voices shouting promises. Follow me. I have the truth. I will lead you to enlightenment. It feels tempting. It feels easy. On the other path, the road is quiet, rough, even a little dark. There are no banners, no loud voices, only silence and the faint whisper of your own heartbeat. Jung would tell you that second road is the real one, because the spiritual path was never meant to be a performance. It was never meant to be outsourced. It is, and always will be, a journey inward. The psychology of spiritual narcissists is not just about pointing out the flaws in others. It's about seeing how the human psyche itself creates this dynamic. It's about understanding that the same forces that produce false gurus out there can also rise within us. And the moment we see that, we reclaim our power. So let's recap. What makes a spiritual narcissist so dangerous? First, their denial of the shadow. They refuse to acknowledge their flaws, covering them with the language of light. Second, their identification with the self. They mistake their fragile ego for the infinite, claiming authority they do not truly have. And third, their exploitation of projection. They feed on the admiration of others, using it to inflate their sense of divinity. Put these three together, and you have a psychology that is magnetic, intoxicating, but ultimately destructive. Now, what's the antidote? Jung gives us three answers. The first is humility. True spiritual insight is always humbling, never inflating. It reminds you of your smallness in the face of the vast unknown. The second is shadow work, facing your darkness, owning your flaws, and integrating them into your whole self. And the third is self-reliance, reclaiming your projections, remembering that the wisdom you admire in others is also within you. But let's not just keep this theoretical. Let's make it personal. Picture yourself in a situation where someone is sharing spiritual wisdom. Maybe it's a teacher, a speaker, or even a friend. Ask yourself, do I feel empowered by their words, or do I feel dependent on them? Do they encourage me to trust myself, or do they subtly demand that I trust only them? That simple reflection can be a shield. It can protect you from falling under the spell of a spiritual narcissist. And what about you? When you share your own insights, are you doing it to help or to shine? Are you seeking to serve or to be seen? That awareness matters. Because if we can catch ourselves in those small moments of ego, we prevent the bigger trap from forming. Jung believed the path to individuation, the process of becoming whole, requires brutal honesty with oneself. Not cruelty, not shame, but honesty. To look in the mirror and say, yes, I want to be admired. Yes, I crave recognition. But I also want truth more than illusion. That honesty is the doorway to freedom. Let me share one last story. There was a man, let's call him Yusef. He spent years following different teachers, reading different books, always searching for someone to give him the final answer. One day, after yet another disappointment, he sat alone under a tree, and for the first time, instead of asking, "Who will guide me?" he asked, "What am I avoiding within myself?" That question changed everything. He realized he had been chasing external authority because he was afraid of his own inner silence. He was afraid of what he might find if he stopped running. And when he finally sat with that silence, he discovered something astonishing. Not answers, not certainty, but a deep, quiet knowing that the journey was his, that the guru he had been searching for was never out there. It was always within. That's the essence of Jung's psychology. The spiritual narcissist is a warning, a mirror, a temptation. But it's also an opportunity. Because every time you encounter someone who claims to hold the light, you have a choice. To give them your power or to reclaim it. To follow blindly or to walk consciously. To project yourself outward or to own it inward. So here's the moral takeaway. Beware of those who speak of light, but cast shadows they do not own. Beware of those who demand loyalty, silence questioning, and thrive on your dependence. But most of all, beware of the parts of yourself that want to play the same game. The ego is clever. It will disguise itself as wisdom, as love, even as enlightenment. But the unconscious always knows. And if you dare to look within, if you dare to see your own shadow, you'll find a freedom no narcissist can touch. And now, let's bring this all back to you. Why does this matter for your life, right now, today? Because the world is full of voices, each claiming to hold the truth. But only one voice will walk with you until your last breath, your own. And that voice, though quieter than the rest, is the one Jung would tell you to trust. It may not always be certain, it may not always be clear, but it's yours, and it's real. So the next time someone stands before you, glowing with spiritual certainty, remember, the true guru never takes your power. They hand it back to you. The true teacher doesn't say, "Follow me." They say, "Follow yourself." And the true path is not about being seen as enlightened. It's about being whole. Now take a breath. Reflect on what we've explored. The psychology of spiritual narcissists isn't just a curiosity. It's a mirror for all of us. It shows us how fragile the ego can be, how seductive the mask of light is, and how easily we can lose ourselves chasing illusions. But it also shows us the way back, through humility, shadow work, and the courage to walk our own road. If you've made it this far, it means you're not just curious, you're searching. Maybe you've encountered spiritual narcissists before. Maybe you felt their pull. Or maybe you've noticed the seeds of it within yourself. Wherever you are, know this. Awareness is already the beginning of freedom. The fact that you see it means you're no longer blind to it. And that's how transformation starts. So let me leave you with a challenge. For the next week, whenever you hear someone speak about spirituality, pause and ask yourself, how does this make me feel? Do I feel smaller, or do I feel larger? Do I feel dependent, or do I feel empowered? And then, when you share something spiritual yourself, pause again. Ask, am I serving others or serving my ego? If you do this honestly, even for a week, you'll begin to notice patterns. You'll begin to catch the subtle games of the ego, and slowly, you'll step into the kind of spirituality Jung envisioned. Not inflated, not narcissistic, but whole. Because at the end of the day, spirituality is not about appearances. It's not about followers or recognition, or being the one who knows. It's about becoming more human, more integrated, more real. And that, my friend, is something no narcissist can ever achieve. Now, before we close, let me say this. If this journey resonated with you, if it opened your eyes to something you hadn't seen before, don't keep it to yourself. Share it. Start a conversation. Ask your friends. Have you ever met a spiritual narcissist? Have you ever noticed these dynamics in yourself? These conversations matter, because the more we bring them to light, the less power the mask of false light has over us. And if you'd like to keep exploring these deep psychological truths through the lens of Carl Jung and beyond, make sure you subscribe. Hit that notification bell so you don't miss what's coming next. Leave a comment below and tell me, what was your biggest takeaway from this exploration? Was it about projection? About the shadow? About reclaiming your power? I'd love to hear. So, until next time, remember this. The greatest wisdom is not in those who claim to be gods. It's in those who dare to remain human. Stay aware, stay humble, and keep walking your own road.